Welcome back, everyone. My name's Wade. This is Bourbon Hall, and on this multi-part series, we're going to be talking everything whiskey. First, let's get a pour. I'm having some just regular old Michter's small batch bourbon to start it off right. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, this series has been kind of generated by a lot of my friends that have just had questions, general questions, seeing the interest that I have within the whiskey world, and just wanting to know more about it. So this first part of the series, we're going to talk about my love, my namesake, bourbon. So sit back, relax, grab a glass, and let's learn a little bit. Cheers. So some people want to ask, what's bourbon? What makes bourbon bourbon? That's a very interesting question because bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. It's kind of a weird, tricky thing. First thing to think about bourbon is it's American, United States of America. The only place that bourbon can be made. The same product can be made in Canada, England, anywhere, but it has to be in the United States of America to be considered bourbon. So, after we know that it's made in America, what makes a bourbon bourbon? Well, first of all, let's just think of the components that go within a bourbon. For example, a bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, and then usually it's rye, a little bit of malt, can be wheat. That differs from time, but it has to be at least 51% corn. Easy, right? The next thing that we need to look at is what makes bourbon bourbon. It has to be put in brand new charred oak barrels. Now, this is just an example. This is a charred oak spiral, and this is placed into bottles to do more rapid aging. But for bourbon, it needs to be in new white oak, American white oak barrels, and they're fired on the inside, and then the white liquor, white dog is what it's called, is placed in there, and then it begins to age. An interesting thing about the white oak is it takes about a white oak to hit maturity at about 100 years. So it takes it about 100 years to grow, and we can get about 2 barrels out of each tree. Now, I was just at Buffalo Trace, and they said that they made approximately 2,000 barrels a day. Okay? That's about 1,000 trees a day just for one major distiller. We're not even thinking of Heaven Hill, Jim Beam, all the other distilleries out there that are using new white oak barrels. Is there going to be a shortage? Yeah. Do they say that? No. Don't you worry, pretties. There won't be a shortage of white oak. Well, it takes 100 years for one to grow, so at some point, we're going to run out. But that's for a different series. We'll get to that at a different time. So once we have our new white oak barrel that's charred on the inside, we have to put product in it, right? Which is called white dog at that time. But there's specifications that are important that are regulated to make it a bourbon. So with a still, obviously a huge column still, right? Or some type of other, pot still or something like that, it can't come off. The product, the alcohol, cannot come off at more than 160 proof or 80% alcohol. Then it has to be watered down. Before it gets into one of those barrels to be called bourbon, it has to be 125 proof or less. And that's called barrel entry. For example, this is Mash 1 Buffalo Trace White Dog. See, it is clear as day, and all of our bourbon starts like this. Clear and a little harsh, to be honest. It needs time in that oak. So they water it down to 125 proof and then place it into barrels. Then the aging starts. So then it's all about the age and what the barrel gives to it. Each barrel can give a little bit different. Even if it's from the same tree, different parts of the tree may give a little bit different of a flavor composition or just give itself to the whiskey in a different way. So then we come to after the 2 years. Well, I guess after 2 years, we can call it straight Kentucky bourbon or straight whatever bourbon. There's other places that make a lot of bourbon. Indiana, Texas, Missouri has some good bourbon. So it doesn't have to be just in Kentucky. So once we have the aging done, if it's 2 years or 20 years, what happens then? Well, then we hit the bottling process. And that's where it gets a little tricky. So how does it get tricky, you say? Well, the longer that whiskey is in a barrel, the stronger it usually gets, meaning the alcohol concentration gets higher. The water starts to evaporate through the wood and gives the angel share, as it calls. And so mostly it gets more concentrated and a higher proof. So if they take that barrel and dump it right from there, it's what's considered barrel proof. And barrel proof, for example, Stag is a great example of something that is barrel proof. Now there's lots of different things that are barrel proof strength or uncut, unfiltered. And so for example, this is 125.9 proof. Now you can find different Stag batches or different batches of barrel proof that go up into the 100 or 140 proofs. And it's just because they lost more, the concentration got stronger, and this is still bourbon, although it's high proof bourbon. Next, you can have something what's considered full proof. My example here is this Weller full proof. It's went in, remember, as this at 125 proof. And so that they calculate and put it back to 125 proof, full proof, okay? Understand? So usually maybe something like this would come out of a barrel at 132 proof, who knows? And then they add water to make it 125 proof, full proof, okay? So when do you have to stop calling it bourbon when you're adding water to cut it down? Because remember, most of the things that come out of the barrel probably are in the 110 to 140 range, give or take age, time, and what proof it went in the barrel for, or as, right? So there is a rule that it can't be under 80 proof. Now you'll see some different products that are 80 proof bourbons. That's right. So you would hear a lot of people like me probably say that they prefer whiskeys that are higher proofed. Why is that? Well, that's a great question. Sometimes it's because we've acclimated ourselves pretty well to the lower proof things, and higher proof usually has a higher concentration of flavors and just gives more interesting overall profile. So if you're watching this because your husband, your wife, or a friend is into bourbon, that's maybe something that you want to look at if they've been into bourbon for a while, or whiskey in general. Usually a higher proof does mean a higher concentrated of flavor, and that's something that's usually sought after. So last thing that you might want to know if you're talking about someone that is a bourbon nerd like me, if something has flavors, additives, anything added to it, it's not bourbon. It's one of the laws. You can't call it bourbon. So honey whiskey, cinnamon, all of those different things, additives of any kind, it turns a bourbon whiskey into a whiskey. Can't be called bourbon anymore. So that might be helpful when you're having a discussion around someone that is really pretentious about it. Most time, we don't care. We know what you mean, right? So, also, how to drink your bourbon. This is just a little tip on the end of this video. See this right here? If you don't know, this is called a Glencairn. Traditionally, just a whiskey glass. It's supposed to help aromas gather towards the top, so you can look like a really pretentious D-bag as you're smelling your wonderful brown liquid, right? So that's one way to drink it. Another one, just pure in a rocks glass, right? And put it over ice, or don't. Drink it how you want, or with a mixer. Who cares? Now I will say that if you're around someone that has a lot of bourbon collection like me, and let's say you see a pretty bottle that they have, all you should do is ask if you should have that one with Coke or not. The reason I'm telling you that is because I had a friend grab this bottle and pour it in some Coke without me really knowing. And yeah, I would have probably advised against that, because the product that you're putting in there versus the experience you're getting, might as well go with a lower end product. Something like this. You know, $40, $700. Yeah, it's gonna taste pretty good in the Coke either way. So we don't need to spend all that money on an experience like that. So just ask, guys, just ask. If you don't know, ask. We'd love to tell you. But I appreciate you guys stopping in. I hope it was helpful and a little bit of education. There's gonna be more educational parts of this series. The next one I'm gonna do is bourbon versus scotch versus whiskey. What does it all mean? We'll clear that up at a later point. But since you're here, I just wanna say thanks for watching. Hopefully it's educated you a little bit or just helped you know what you already knew, right? So smash that like, subscribe if you want to. Please comment down below. YouTube loves that. So yeah, appreciate you guys just sitting here watching out. Let me know what else you would like to see if you have questions about anything in the whiskey world, because that's why we're here, to educate, have a little bit of fun, and I can't wait to experience it with you guys. So until next time, let's have some good whiskey. Peace.